So, yesterday on Twitter, I had written a couple of comments about atheism and secularism, and I wanted to comment a little further because I had some private messaging from folks about my comments that seemed to be so upset that it's almost as if I were advocating not for the abolishment of separation between church and state, or mosque and state, as some people said. And I'll say this: yes, I'm in favor of a rule of government that has religious sensibilities involved in it. Now, I know for some people this will be like, oh my God, what are you saying? Don't you enjoy the religious freedoms that you have here in America? Well, yes, but that doesn't mean this is the only place where you can have religious freedoms. There are many places around the world where one can have religious freedoms. Secondly is the assumption that because a regime is built upon religious sensibilities, that there isn't also room for people who don't necessarily share those same sensibilities. That somehow only secular democracy can be tolerant. Although, to be quite honest, secular democracy ain't as tolerant as you think it is. It likes to be the top dog. Matter of fact, it kind of likes to be the only dog. The other part that I find really problematic with atheists and secularist apologists, including many Muslims, is that they are almost naively optimistic about the capabilities of secular modes of government, particularly as it's manifested in the West, to the point where there's a total denial of the historical atrocities that secular and atheist regimes have racked up in the historical record. I mean, Western democracy hasn't had any problem with waging, endless war. Secular democracy didn't have any problem with, completely annihilating the indigenous peoples of the West. It didn't have any problem with slavery. It didn't have any problem with the Japanese internment. It didn't have any problem turning on, its Jewish populations, as it's done throughout time, particularly in Europe. So, this idea that somehow a religious regime would be more brutal and intolerant than any secular regime just simply does not bear out in the historical record. And I'm really curious where this over-optimism for secular democracy is getting so much play and is getting so much support. I think that people have just simply been brainwashed or are ideologues, and therefore they're not interested in facts. They're just interested in what they're interested in. And they've also rushed to conclusions that religion must always play out to be somehow violent and somehow intolerable, whereas the body count that Western secular democracy and even the atheist regimes of like China and the USSR, we seem to have forgotten about that, or other parts of Southeast Asia. We seem to somehow have some kind of weird historical amnesia that they must always, that essentially they can always be forgiven. I guess that's what I'm saying. There's always this incredible optimism that they can always be forgiven, and that any atrocities that they committed were somehow just a tragic result on the road to progress and inevitable prosperity and unity and so on, even though that really doesn't, again, when you look at the historical record, this does not bear fruit. This does not bear out. So, yeah, I am definitely not in favor as my number one choice of government being democracy and being secular. I am definitely, matter of fact, I think the few good things about our culture as a so-called secular democracy are remnants of morality and ethics that developed out of a religious sensibility. Somehow, though, there's never the toleration that's given to the potentials of a religious government that it could improve. That whatever its mistakes are purely fatalistic, can never get any better, and always have to result in a negative. But when it comes to a secular regime, well, there's always tomorrow. It can always somehow get better, and whoever happened to kind of get trampled underfoot, kind of like an anthill being trampled under a boot, well, that's just, those are tragedies, and those are very unfortunate. Well, maybe you should ask the mountain of dead skulls whether they considered it to be unfortunate, because that's exactly what there is when it comes to secular regimes, is that there is a massive body count of people that have been trampled underfoot and then are silenced. And it's almost been made to appear as if these people never existed in the first place. I mean, we live here in America almost as if it's natural for us to be here, like we've been here since the flood of Noah or something, and that the people that used to live here, it's just natural for them to be gone and to be almost completely erased from history. So I just wanted to, bring that up as something to consider as we are so eager to champion secularism and democracy. I mean, if we're going to do it, then it should be championed based upon its results. And I'm sorry, but the rest of the world, I think an also important point here too is that a lot of the Muslim world in particular and its so-called regimes are really not as religious as people make them out to be. Two, we haven't really seen what they can do, because there's nobody within living memory that has been able to experience what the pre-modern Muslim world had to offer, which was, again, rule under religious sensibility. And I'm not saying all of it was perfect, but all of it was also not imperfect. None of us has any living memory of what that might have been. What we've been dealing with in our living memory is the results and the influence of Western imperialism that brought with it its secular ideologies, and then just simply propped up all manner of, despotic rulers that have given religious rule and even just religion in general kind of a bad rap, and has done a very good job at kind of persuading everybody that, well, whatever atrocities or whatever injustices that it committed, they're okay because they've somehow been in line with some general progressivism. And we can't really make a play call on the quality or the potentials of religious rule in the Muslim world until we have a chance to really rid it of foreign imperial interests and to see what the genius might develop. Now, if it turns out to really be bad, well then okay, we can, we can come and we can make that conclusion. But I don't think people are really earnestly coming to a conclusion without acknowledging that, if this were like a scientific study, the laboratory we're working in is not exactly sterile, so the results we're getting are not accurate. And that isn't to say that essentially just to perpetuate some kind of victimology within the Muslim world? No. But at the same time, I feel like we're not exactly getting a look at what it is, certainly compared to Western democracy, that the vast majority of them are not operating under foreign influences. So we are getting a better picture of what it really has to offer. And its body count is pretty high. Its injustices are pretty high. And I'm sorry, but I'm not convinced. So, that had a lot to do with what I was talking about yesterday. And also the way, just like how, the indigenous peoples, particularly of this part of the world, have kind of been erased from the historical record. Secularism would like us to believe that all of the beauty that we see before us is just a result of its own handiwork, but there would be no art without religion. There would be no understanding of beauty without religion, because it's what has, for millennia, since the dawn of time, it has informed our sensibilities. And to pretend that religion has nothing to contribute positive to society and civilization is propaganda on the highest level. So anyway, just sharing some thoughts, inshallah. Feel free to send me your comments, but you're going to have to do a better job at articulating your thoughts to pull that kind of Jedi mind trick on me.